So who owns the capital in South Africa? And for us to start, let us start by looking at the money aspect of the capital, the money and the debt aspect. So in South Africa, we've got three types of money: coins, notes, and debt. Our banks in general have about 4 to 5% of the money in circulation in coins and notes. However, there is another 95% of this money that is debt. And that debt is all created by banks. Now, the banks that create most of the debt in South Africa are known as commercial banks. They create anything between 80% and 85% of the debt in South Africa. And with this debt that they create it and grow the money supply. They grow the money supply in South Africa. They grow the money that is available for people to borrow in order to buy assets and in order to buy capital assets that can make more money. So let's see who creates this money into the system. The person responsible for creating money into the system, or the institution responsible for creating money into the system, is the Reserve Bank of South Africa. However, the Reserve Bank of South Africa prints the notes and they produce the coins, but they only create 6% of debt. And they're usually the lender of last resort. All the other debt is created by the banks in the system. Now, in these banks, we've got the commercial banks. They are private-owned banks. And there's 5 of them in South Africa. They create 80 to 85% of the debt that we have. So this is debt for mortgages, cars, and for businesses that want to borrow in order to buy plant, machinery, business premises, to construct buildings, to construct factories, and the like. And even to finance deals, imports, and those kind of facilities. Then we've got a bit of debt that is also then created by your agri-bank, land bank, and your agri-bank, your IDC, and these are the government-owned banks. But the majority of the debt is created by the commercial banks. Now, the commercial banks are privately owned. And then the Reserve Bank that regulates them is also privately owned. The Reserve Bank that also creates our notes and creates our coins is privately owned. And the private ownership has got shareholders. And the shareholders that hold shares in the Reserve Bank are the commercial banks. There are other private shareholders, but the biggest shareholders to the Reserve Bank are the commercial banks. But what is interesting is that the Reserve Bank is not only involved in creating the money supply, they're not only involved in giving us the notes and the currency that we use, they're also the ones that are responsible in maintaining the price of that currency, maintaining the stability of that currency. And they do that by playing around with interest rates. So what we're talking about in South Africa on the money aspect is that our money supply is not created by government, but our money supply is created by private entities that are controlled by the 5 big banks. Most of the money supply that we have, which is the physical currency, together with the debt, at least 80 to 85% of that debt, is created by private companies. It is created by private companies that are majority white owned. So you look at the structure of the Reserve Bank, it's got 14 directors. Of those 14 directors, 8 of them are white. The 4 that are not white are appointed by government, and then we've got 2 Indians there. That for me is already white monopoly in the Reserve Bank. In the shareholding structure of the Reserve Bank, you've got the 5 monopolistic commercial banks. Those 5 monopolistic commercial banks are mainly controlled by white South Africans and foreign Europeans. So there is white monopoly in our financial monetary system. So when it comes to money, money supply, debt, it is white monopoly. So now from there, let's now go and look and say, we've discovered that the money aspect, the money that builds the economy, the money that makes an economy run, the debt that makes an economy run, is monopolized by white people. So white monopoly capital in the money aspect exists. But then once we've got money in the system, to build an economy, people have got to be able to acquire that debt in order to buy factors of production, in order to buy capital assets that are going to produce more money into the economy. So who is it that gets the money to be able to buy the capital, to be able to buy the land, to be able to buy the buildings, to be able to construct buildings, construct anything, to buy the plant and machinery and agricultural equipment? Who buys it? If you look at the structure of the economy of agriculture, mining, manufacturing, construction, real estate, you will discover retail, you will discover that the majority of people that own these businesses are white. Why? Because when they go to the bank and they need to get a loan from the bank, they have to be able to put down a collateral. Now, because of the previous dispensation of apartheid, a lot of black people cannot afford debt. They cannot afford collateral. They do not have the assets to put down as collateral in order to get business loans, in order to get loans to grow their businesses by getting more assets, in order to be able to have plant, machinery, and technology in their businesses. So the people that are acquiring this debt from these private banks, from this private capital, happen to be white people. And they are the ones that can afford to be able to get these loans, and they're the ones that are able to build the big businesses that actually become the capital creators in the economy. So again, in that aspect, we see a monopoly. And that monopoly is in mining, it's in printing, it's in agriculture, manufacturing. You name any business sector in South Africa except the taxi industry, it's monopolized by white people. But then, as much as I can say that the taxi industry is not monopolized by white people, we now need to look at the value chain. Who controls the value chain that provides these capital assets? Who sells these capital assets? These capital assets are owned and sold by companies that are basically white. Barloworld is one of the biggest machine agents in the country. It's white. Every single company, if not all of them, that provide machinery, be it digging machinery, be it Caterpillar, you name it, it's a European ownership, but the agents and the agencies that are in South Africa are white owned. Again, it's an issue of the fact that they're the only people that had the skill, the knowledge, and the collateral to get capital to start these infrastructures. So in the value chain, it is dominated by white monopoly capital. So there are those that then say, but hold on, you can't talk about white monopoly capital when government itself has got a huge budget of $1.2 trillion every single year at their disposal to use. That is a black government that's utilizing those resources. But that black government has got a law, the Public Finance Management Act, that tells them how they must be able to use that money. There are tender regulations that tell us who we're supposed to give a tender to, and you will recognize that the majority of companies that will qualify for those kind of tenders, the majority of companies that will be able to meet up with the requirements of most tenders would be companies that have got the assets and the background, experience, and reputation of a white company, because black businesses just didn't have scale because of previous advantages. So again, there's a monopolization of government money. Yes, some goes to corruption, but when it is adjudicated properly, a lot of the companies that will get those contracts will be white, even if they have fake BEE credentials and shareholders. There's a monopoly in that aspect. Then let's also talk about another aspect. Not all money that government uses comes from taxes. Some of the money that government uses actually comes from borrowing again from these private financial institutions. Like we said, debt, 96% of the debt that's created, 85% of the debt that's created in South Africa is created by private institutions. So when our government needs capital, they have to go to these private institutions to get that capital. And so they are lent money by a white institution. And so government is indebted to these private institutions, these white-controlled monopolies. where there is already a white monopoly capital that is dominating. So for our government to undertake any real big-scale projects and programs, they are indebted to white monopoly capital. For them to undertake big projects, they are indebted to lenders that are white monopoly capital. So white monopoly capital, from the basics of what I'm saying here, is real. It is real in the financial aspect. It is real in the value chain of supplying goods and services into the marketplace. It is real in the people that have the ability to take the debt and the ability to consume these capital assets and these goods and services in the marketplace, predominantly consumed by white people, white companies, white shareholders. This is problematic. And this is why those people that are talking about white monopoly capital have an issue that needs to be addressed. What's ironic on the money supply is that we've got five monopolistic banks in South Africa who happen to be shareholders in the Reserve Bank, which happens to be the regulator of banks, which happens to be the registrar of banks, and which happens to make decisions on who can be allowed to open a bank in South Africa through their own mechanisms, and their own procedures, and their own criteria, which is determined by the registrar of the banks. Now, if this registrar of the banks is an employee of shareholders who happen to be the monopolistic banks in the marketplace, isn't that a conflict of interest? What are the chances that this registrar can allow black banks or Indian banks or any other nature or other race of banks to come into the playing field if the shareholders or his employers happen to be the five big banks that have been a monopoly for a very long time? What are the chances that they will allow black players to come into the marketplace? And when you read the Reserve Bank Act together with the Banking Act, you will automatically see the control that the Reserve Bank, this private institution, has on our banking system and our money plus supply system. And in this undertaking of controlling our money supply is owned by private people. It is owned by private organizations, and they have secrets and do not divulge how they make their decisions on money supply, how they make their decisions on the price of money, how they make their decisions on the reserves to hold. Yet these are supposed to be public finances. Now, the last issue I need to address with you. So why are educated black people, educated white people, and the media telling us that there is nothing called white monopoly capital? What you need to understand is this. Every judge, every journalist, every accountant, every person in this country is indebted one way or the other to a bank. Number one, if they don't need debt, they need somewhere to keep their funds. And where they need to keep their funds is a bank. And then if they need debt, where they're going to get their debt and all their debt is from the banks. And what we sometimes forget is that the judges, these journalists, live in the real world in which they rub shoulders with people that are controlling this white monopoly capital. So they don't just meet white monopoly capital at the bank, but they actually meet the faces of the directors and the shareholders in the schools their children go. Judges are supposedly very high-paid people, the high net income people. Their children go to the same schools where a lot of the shareholders of the banks, the shareholders and the directors of the Reserve Bank go. So they will meet in places. They will rub shoulders with the lawyers. They will rub shoulders with journalists. They will rub shoulders with media owners. They will rub shoulders with white monopoly capital. Now, I want you to just think about it, that when people in authority whose word matters meets with the people that finance their debt, meet with people that can erase their debt, meet with people that basically live by rules that they make on their own, what do you think happens? So now our politicians are not necessarily high net worth, but they're very important people in the society. So sooner or later, they also aspire to rub shoulders with the who's of society. But that who's of society, that 1 percentile that runs the country, happen to be white monopoly capital. So when our politicians start rubbing shoulders with white monopoly capital, what happens? What happens when their salaries are not enough for the lifestyles that they need, but they're rubbing shoulders with white monopoly capital that creates the debt? What happens when they're rubbing shoulders and they want to go into a golf club, but that golf club happens to be controlled by white monopoly capital or owned by somebody in the white monopoly capital structure, but they want in? How do you think they get in? When their children want to go to the best private schools, but in these best private schools, only children of the elite can go, what do you think happens when our politicians want to take their children to the same schools? They've got to negotiate with white monopoly capital outside the business sphere, in the social sphere. In the social sphere, just like the business sphere, white monopoly capital, shareholders and owners hold a lot of weight. And in there are deals, there are favors that are done. And these can change the interpretation of stories. These can make a journalist start to speak a different language because now he wants to walk in the echelons that he can't afford to walk, but white monopoly capital can pay his ticket. Politicians start to change their tunes. Certain parties, the EFF used to speak a certain language. Now they're speaking a different language. But don't forget, white monopoly capital can make Julius Malema's debt go away. White monopoly capital can make sure that Julius never needs money again. It can make sure that the political party never needs to be funded by anyone again because it's got enough money. White monopoly capital creates the money supply. So this is how the narrative of denying white monopoly capital from not only opposition party members, but even ruling party members starts to happen. The Pravin Gordons are speaking a different language. They went to war. They went to the bush to fight white monopoly capital. But today, the very same men that were in exile, very same men that were killed by white monopoly capital will tell you that white monopoly capital does not exist. It is because of the domination of white monopoly capital and its ability to co-opt, its ability to corrupt, its ability to pay people in positions of authority that white monopoly capital exists. So I hope that you guys have understood what white monopoly capital is in simple terms. If they're owning the money supply, if they're owning the debt, if they're owning the value chain of capital asset sales or capital asset agency, if they're owning capital assets and the collateral to be able to get capital assets, and if they're owning the debt that's given to your government, and they happen to be white with no competition, that's white monopoly capital. I hope you understand. And from today, with that understanding, start trying to understand how that system can be dismantled. Black banks need to take place. They need to be active as commercial banks. And the reason why it's important for black banks to be commercial banks is how people have a license to make money from thin air. In commercial banks, they hold a minimum of 10% reserves for the amount of debt that they can create. They can create 10 times more debt than the reserves that they hold. There's been a change right now with the Basel Agreement. There's going to be an increase of that reserve to 14%. But even when it is 14%, still they're able to create 100% debt of 14% reserves. Now, I don't know if you guys understand what I'm saying to you, but when they give you a loan for a car, and they give you 600,000 to get a car, you will understand that 60,000 of that 600,000 is really the money that the bank is putting in. The rest of that 600,000 from 60,000 is money that's been created from thin air, called fractional reserve banking. That's the power that commercial banks have. That is the power that the 5 big banks in South Africa have to create that debt from thin air. And they don't want black people to make that kind of money. They don't want black people having the license to make money from thin air. This is why you don't have any black commercial banks. So whenever they lend you money at the bank, they are not lending you their money. In the fact that 10% of that is their reserve means that 10% of whatever they lend you is their money. The rest, the 90%, was created from thin air. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But let's understand how the system works. Read the Reserve Bank Act, read the Banking Act, read the Mercantile Banking Act. Let's start getting true education and real education, and not this education from your textbooks, because this you were not taught in economics class. This you are not taught even if you're holding an MBA, because they don't need you to know the system and how it works, because then you would make it dysfunctional. Good night.